word community may sound pleasantly archaic, a remnant of an idyllic past. Community was where we put down roots, celebrating common heritage and shared belief. But today, our roots are like radio waves, planted nowhere and beaming everywhere. And so the concept of community is changing. We have ethnic communities with special customs, spiritual communities with special visions, scientific communities with special symbols, and online communities where no one has ever heard a voice, much less seen a face. These new communities may be broader, more diverse, and more powerful than we think. Next, on Closer to Truth, new communities for the new millennium. Welcome to Closer to Truth. I'm Robert Kuhn. New communities are more than your friendly neighborhood or favorite chat room. They've spread around the planet, erasing time, distance, and political boundaries. For this edition of Closer to Truth, we've asked 5 prominent thinkers to describe the communities of tomorrow. They bring a rich variety of perspectives. Bruce Chapman is a former director of the U.S. Census Bureau and founder of the Discovery Institute, a public policy think tank in Seattle. Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, an astrophysicist at Princeton, is director of the Hayden Planetarium in New York. Dr. John McWhorter is a professor of linguistics at Berkeley, where he has shown how language defines and differentiates communities. Saru Jaramanan is the founder of WISE, Women and Youth Supporting Each Other, a nonprofit organization working with young women in the inner city. And Barbara Marx Hubbard is a futurist and inventive author who envisions one global community. Bruce, you've had a rich career in public policy, from writer and publisher to White House staff and diplomat. Now, as president of the Discovery Institute, you're involved with diverse communities. As you look to the future, why is such diversity important?
Well, I think with the technological revolution that one of our fellows, George Gilder, has written about so much, we're going to see new forms of community developing. And at the same time, I think with this fractured sense of community, with people having many more niche communities, if you will, you're also going to see a return, and maybe we need to say a word for the old communities, the sense of neighborhood. And I think we're going to find people paying more attention to how to revive those.
You look at communities from regional to religious, from cultural to civic.
Exactly. The relationships, that's what we're talking about. Interrelationships among people and a sense of obligations that come, and a sense of connectedness.
Neil, you're an astrophysicist, and some of your communities are in the galaxies and the stars. But you're deeply involved with the public appreciation of science and very much involved in the scientific community. Is the scientific community special? Is it important today?
I like to think of the scientific community as not simply those who practice science, but those who can appreciate science in its more fundamental levels. And I'll give you a perfect example. It's sometimes said that the state lottery system is a tax on those who never did well in mathematics. And when I think of a community of people, of scientifically literate population, I want to think of people who know what scientific issues are important and can think coherently and collectively about that. And in that sense, we create a scientific community that pervades society.
So your view is the scientific community should be pandemic, should apply to everyone?
Of course, because it's not my science or your science. It's science. It's the nature of the world around us, and no one has. Yes, there are a few people who know it better than others, but the same laws of physics apply to me as they apply to you, and there's no reason why I should have total reins over how that over who knows that. It's for everyone.
John, I am trying to figure out how many different communities you belong to. You're a professor at a world-class institution, you're a linguist, a musician, a historian, an American, an African-American, a social commentator, a critic. Forgive me if I've left out a couple. Focus on language, your specialty, and how language is used to differentiate community by community as well as to unify them.
Well,
Language is an ever-changing thing. Any speech system is always changing in any given number of directions. It just has to. And the fact of the matter is that one of the indexes of a community or a group of people feeling intimately connected is having their own variety of whatever the reigning language is. You can expect that if there is a group of people who feel unified among themselves, there will be ways that they speak which are different from everything else. And that's not only in America, but that's just everywhere in the world. And so one index of a feeling that a community might even have of not being part of the greater community is the extent to which their speech differs from that which is considered mainstream.
Does that create some fragmentation?
Often it does, yeah. Often you can think of linguistic differences, although in themselves they are fine, harmless, and often wonderful things, as indexes of fragmentation. If people are all speaking in very different ways, most likely there is either a problem or people who are at best peaceably coexisting with great separatism.
Saru, you like to call yourself a nonviolent revolutionary. After graduating with advanced degrees in public policy from Harvard and law from Yale, you plan to go into social activism. Tell us about WISE, this organization, marvelous one that you created.
WISE works with young women aged 12 to 14 in disadvantaged communities across the country. We provide these young women with the resources, information, and support to help them make responsible decisions and create community change and then go on and become leaders in their communities. It focuses on providing them with the tools to think critically and deconstruct images that are coming at them and pressures that are coming at them from a variety of sources, school, parents,
How do you
society.
teach these young people to think critically?
It's all about asking the right questions and getting them to express themselves and also giving them new lenses on the world that they can use or not use. Lenses such as feminism, perhaps, or new views on power dynamics in society, classism, those kinds of things. But what I've seen increasingly with these girls and with young people in general is that because they do not feel part of a larger community, a place where they reside, or the larger American community, they've gone on to sometimes create their own alternative communities.
For this show, you'll promise to remain nonviolent.
I promise.
Okay, Barbara, in your books, you tell a forthright, wonderful tale of your transformation from a mother of five into a pioneer of global consciousness. Your book is Conscious Evolution, and it's your hallmark. Tell us a little bit about that and how that enriches the sense of community.
Well, just very briefly, my own movement in this direction came when the U.S. dropped the bomb on Japan. And I'd always thought we were progressing through knowing more. And I suddenly saw we could kill ourselves by knowing more. So then the question I asked is, what is the meaning of all this power that's good of science, technology, industry? And I said, well, where's the positive image of the future equal to our new power? And I found it wasn't written down anywhere. We have images of destruction, images of Armageddon. We have images very mystical, like the New Jerusalem. But where is the human race going? And when I was 21, my father took me to visit President Eisenhower. And I said, Mr. President, what is the purpose of all our power? That's good. And I'll never forget him. He shook his head. He said, I have no idea. And I decided to make a lifelong search for an image of the future based on real power that would be good. And that has led me to the view that actually something of huge importance is happening, is that the way evolution works is itself evolving.
How does this affect the nature of community?
First of all, it gives every human being, wherever they are, a sense that there's meaning to the struggle. That it isn't just all about a mistake, is that the human race has a potential that's great. Secondly, that means every human being has a potential. And if you're frustrated and you're upset in your world, that's the universe evolving through you.
I'm troubled, actually, by the use of the term evolution in describing the development of communities, because I think the term evolution itself, as this is a program about the future, is coming into a period of great redefinition and even challenge. You have people like J.Y. Chen in China and Michael Behe and William Dembski here in the so-called intelligent design movement, challenging the whole concept of Darwinian evolution. And the result of that is that we think very differently about what it means to be part of a community. If, in fact, this is not the problem of the scientists, but the applications of the science. If it is a totally materialist world, if we are the product strictly of evolution, then we start to have different attitudes as we have in the 20th century about what it means to be human and what are the consequences of our actions. We start to explain problems in law enforcement based on DNA, for example, or our genetic disposition. And that robs us.
You're criticizing that?
Yes, it robs us of a lot of our humanity because it robs us of responsibility and self-responsibility.
So would you restrict the ability of
I think
science?
that this can be. I think we need a debate about it. I think it's important to have a discussion, a civil discussion about these topics. But I also think that the applications to our politics and to our law enforcement, to our social order itself, ought to be considered on a larger
Wait, does that
plane.
mean social order was perfect before Darwinian evolution?
Of course not. No,
so
no.
then why blame it on that?
No, I'm saying
surely
that
nations lay siege to other nations before Darwin was ever born.
it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with how we see the world in which we live today and whether it is a materialist world. Now we talk about new communities. If in fact evolution is to be guided, as Ray Kurzweil says, by technology, that technology is going to take over the evolutionary process, then we have a very different world than we do if in fact the computer, as George Gilder says, is the triumph of mind over matter. It has to do with how you see human beings.
Michael Behe's point is about God. I mean, his book is...
No, it's not,
well,
actually.
yes, it is. The idea of the book is that Darwinian evolution is a nice idea, but some things could only possibly be explained by having been created by a higher power. I found it a very interesting book. But are you, by any chance, saying that one can't have these kinds of ethics and this kind of community without religion or God? I just want to see if that's what...
I think you can have an ethical order and have. I mean, you had the Stoics and various other people in history. But you do have. It is true that an ethical order based on the idea that there is a design in the universe. That's what really he's saying. It looks like there's a design in the universe.
A design by God.
That it doesn't describe what that designer,
he's very coy about it, but
the
he means
designer
God.
might be, but he does say it looks like there's a design.
I wanted to say that the way I'm using evolution
I know.
is not the narrow definition of mechanistic Darwinian evolution. I got it from Teilhard de Chardin.
Yes.
With the idea that there is a process of creation leading to higher complexity, greater consciousness and freedom. Nobody knows precisely how that design got in there, but I think there is certainly the imminence of design.
Yes.
In cosmogenesis.
What I'd
I
like
think
to
that's
do,
a very good distinction. I'm glad you made it.
Yeah.
what I'd like to do, Neil, is let's get into the workings of the scientific mind and tell us how scientists think.
It's very different from your average societal mental thoughts. I mean, we're trained to be problem solvers. We're trained to trim the fat off of a question and get to the dewdrop essence of what matters in it and focus further analysis onto that. And as you get closer, maybe there's more fat to be trimmed, and you narrow your questions so that you can bring yourself closer to the truth of how the universe works. And
We want the whole universe.
exactly. And we don't always know if the questions we ask are the ones that would lead to the answers. Because in the end, your knowledge base and your ability to figure out answers to problems, that's what wins the argument. It's not how loud you are or how persuasive you are or whether you won debating contests in your day. It's because in the end, you're answerable to nature. Nature is the ultimate adjudicator of all of what we do. So we are humble in the presence of how nature can actually send us back to the drawing board.
And do you think that this type of information is useful in unifying humanity?
Yes, because it's one universe. It's our universe. I can tell you that when a comet is seen in the sky, and I can tell you it's got chemical composition that's identical to what you've got in the human body, to me that's empowering. That tells you that we are stardust. And to me, the community is not just what your little neighborhood does, all deference to what communities were in the 1950s. Community is a sense of what your place is in the universe. And that place can give you a world. And I know it sounds all pie in the sky, but it's what flows through my veins every time I study problems in the universe.
Sarah?
But I think that in some part rests on everybody feeling like they have an equal stake in the universe, right? That if everybody is a part of a community, a universal community, then there has to be some sense of belonging. And I just don't feel that a large percentage of America feels that way. I think there is increasing
Well, how about the
fragment.
Hubble telescope? Beautiful pictures come out. They make cover story of Time magazine. It's mostly tax-based money that paid for that. I see people gathering around, asking questions about it. I see a sense
Which
of...
people, though?
If the people you're talking about,
People
Sarah,
who buy the
would not
magazine.
gather around, I think that's partly, you're right, it's because they feel disincluded from society. But it doesn't have to be that way. People that you're talking about could take delight in seeing pictures of the planet Mercury,
I'm
despite
sure.
the inequities on Earth. The fact that they don't is...
If
Yes.
education were more
And
equal.
you know, it may be that some of them do. I believe, as you were saying, that having the larger view, if it's presented, I'm not saying that everybody would get it, but when it's presented, it's truly in our biochemical brains being that we are the universe awakening as
Like that picture
people.
of Earth from the astronauts.
It's the
that,
truth.
That it changed how we thought of Earth. That picture of Earth that had no national boundaries, just continents. And that actually shifted humanity to another step. And we started thinking of this delicate, fragile planet, the spaceship Earth, moving through.
That's true. I'm
And
not
that can
saying
happen.
that people are not interested.
happen.
People are deeply interested in these in science and technology. Young people, if taught and provided with this information, would be deeply
Well, that's the
interested.
challenge.
Well, that's
to
the
be
challenge.
able-
It
that's
is
for
right,
us to do that.
but I don't think that would move them any closer to a sense of commonality with those that oppress them, unless there's those that oppress the haves equally say they are part of my universe as well.
John, what's the relationship between language and culture?
Well, the fact of the matter is that the development of a different form of the dominant language is part of the formation of a different culture. It goes along with it. It's something that you would expect. Like, for example, in this country, if you notice, even African Americans who have many degrees and who spend a lot of time with white people who are quite fluent in the general society, almost always, about 99% of the time, have what we don't call, but which in fact is a black accent. There is a such thing as sounding black. It's not a matter of slang, it's not a matter of sentence structures, but it's a matter of just sound. You can generally tell on the radio, even when somebody on NPR is black. It's just there. And the reason for that is that there is, and has always been, a feeling in the black community, regardless of socioeconomic level, of a certain sense of separation and of oppression and things that we all know quite a bit about. And as a result of that, the fact of the matter is that except in bizarre, if I may, Neil, cases like Neil and me, generally, you know, African Americans do not sound like, for example, you, Robert. That's just the fact. And so what that means is that if there is a community, if there's a community feeling, then there's going to be a different form of language. And that's true in Bavaria, that's true in New Guinea, and that is an index of community. It's also true in, say, scientific communities. You know, there are different forms of language that scientists use, or that chefs use, or that mechanics use. It's an index of community.
Neil,
There are differences.
scientific communities, African American communities, I got to turn to you. Yeah, take your choice.
Well, I want to distinguish between word choice and actual, just because some jargon contains a category of words that are not common, I don't think of that as a different way of communicating necessarily. But I can tell you that in much of the scientific community, language is introduced to provide a level of precision that the native English does not allow. And so often the language becomes kind of stilted and becomes kind of dry. But I can tell you, in astrophysics, we have no such rules. Big red stars in the universe are called red giants, right? As the beginning of the universe, Big Bang. And I think our language was never separatist. Not purposefully, but as much as the universe is complicated enough, why complicate it with polysyllabic words?
Are you now telling us that astronomers are the elite because they use good language?
Because we use common language. Our vocabulary sets come from the general public.
But Neil, I couldn't read an astrophysics paper. You know,
Well, no, you could pick out the word red giant in there and say other things that are complicated. But the thing itself is...
that I could manage, yes.
But doesn't the fact that we have a scientific class create a new elite where knowledge becomes a great separator of society, whereas money and class used to be, but now it's knowledge?
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but that's the reality, and I think that it will continue. It's a battle between the knows and the knows not.
I think one of the most important things that's happening now in education is that educators are realizing this gap, and they're trying to do something about it in instruction. For example, we see a return to basic core instructions in science, for example, in college. And as part of that, they're saying to people that they have to take a course in science, but not just a specific kinds, but science, but the history of science and the philosophy of science, so they're better able to be customers for Neil's papers later on in life. And I think that's, you're not going to create a universal understanding of science, but you are going to expand it greatly.
But there has to be an understanding that there's different forms of knowledge, that even the know-nots have a form of knowledge that I think we, the elites, do not. You know, call it street knowledge or other cultural knowledge that I think needs to be respected and brought into the discourse. So if new forms of philosophy of science are being taught, then they need to include new philosophies of science.
And I like the difference between IQ and EQ. See, you can be very brilliant but have a very low emotional quotient. And there are a whole range of capacities that don't deal with analytical, critical intellect. And I think in that sense, we need to broaden what we consider to be intelligent.
Bruce, you've been involved with local community changes and a revitalization of the local community.
I think we're going to see with the technology all these different interesting fragmented opportunities to teach by satellite and that sort of thing, whether it's an inner city school or a school in Latin America or Africa or somewhere. But at the same time, it's creating a yearning for old-fashioned community, a community where you know your neighbors, where there's some sort of connection, whether it's through a church or something else, for people to get along. And it's going to create a new sense of architecture. I think that, in fact, it already has. 50 years ago, there was no such thing as a historic preservation movement. Now it's the way we build cities. We try to save and reuse what we have. And we've learned a lot more about the amenities that make life a little more identifiable, putting simple things like street trees and so forth. And you can get people, neighbors, who have very little in common with each other otherwise, to cooperate on projects like that. I think the transformation of the suburbs into something that is more humane, that does not try to separate living from work, from shopping, from church, that I think that is also going to happen in the 21st century. You're going to pull those together because people will demand it, because they will vote for it in various fashions.
But I think there's a limiting factor there, and that is, unlike the 1950s, where you were a company man. You'd work there, you got your job and you worked there for 15 years. You lived in that house for 15 years. So your neighbors and community had a foundation upon which to build. Whereas now, since we're in a technologically driven economy, and since technology has a time scale of 3 or 5 years before things are completely switched, you have people moving back and forth from one place to another, and this old-fashioned sense of community can no longer be where you place your anchor, and we'd have to be more imaginative about what we call community.
Well, I think that actually you're going to have both. You're going to have these different fragmented and niche communities, but you're also going to have a revival of the smaller community, the small town and so forth, because actually what the person who works for the company and gets moved all the time is not as common as he or she was 10 or 15 years ago even. There's actually less fluidity in that sense, less moving around than there used to be.
More
partly because people there are more entrepreneurs, more people who are working for themselves, more people who can decide where they want to live and live there and form a community. There are more volitional decisions of that nature.
Some,
and
but
as
not for
everybody, I didn't say for everybody. I said, but I think you're going to see a trend more in that direction.
The non-elites, I don't think, have as much volition as others, but I do think you are right in that.
They will when you get finished with it.
I hope.
Well, that's a goal.
Work on that.
That is a goal. That should be a goal.
But you are right in that there have been new movements towards developing local geographic communities, and I think a lot of the Alinsky-based community organizing that's been going on the ground, that's based on sometimes church-based relationship building, and then once relationships are built, an understanding of power structures,
exactly.
And then fighting for change against the power structure. I think that has developed local communities in ways in Brooklyn and other places that have allowed people to actually take leadership.
Well, we have to take a final question. We want to look ahead 100 years and ask which kinds of communities have become more important than they are today? Short answer, Barbara.
High synergy, win-win communities in which a diverse group of people feel that they each are giving their gift and being received, and it becomes what I call a co-creative community.
John.
Certain Asian communities, particularly Chinese and Japanese, doing very well commercially and spreading their influence in Asia, and also in their very strong immigrant communities in this country, in 100 years, Asians.
I think the fracturing of the internet and so forth into many different communities will enrich us. We will lose the power of some previous communities that we had, such as which we gained through newspaper readership and so forth. But we will have many more niche communities, which will create a stronger counterpart movement to strengthen neighborhoods, ironically.
Sorry.
I think identity-based communities are another wave of the future. Communities of women, communities of people of color gathering and building strength within themselves so that they can then go on and work together with other communities and build a larger community.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you what I think it should be, but what I think it will be.
Yeah.
And
That's the
I think
question.
it's the ultimate in revenge of the nerds. I think the society used to be between the haves and the have-nots, and it will soon become society between those who know and those who know not.
The nerves and the nerves not.
No, the nerds. I mean, we have Bill Gates, richest man in the world, and he's the patron saint of the nerd community. So in the revenge of the nerds, those who have embraced technology and embraced the way society's going, those are the people who will be in control, and that'll be the lead community.
The traditional community was the one where we lived, but global communications now allow us to live in many communities at the same time. The diversity of these new communities is staggering and promises to broaden opportunity and enrich humanity. Our best hope for the future, it seems, are ever-growing new communities of shared interests and meaningful action, provided those communities don't become islands of isolation. New communities can bring us closer together, and it is hoped, closer to truth. I'm Robert Kuhn.
To explore topics like these, join us online at www.closertotruth.com.